The moment the world first heard about Archie Harrison's birth, the story seemed perfectly crafted. Headlines flashed across newspapers and online outlets. Royal baby born at Portland Hospital. Meghan and Harry welcome son. Portland witnesses another royal miracle. The public drank it in, delighted by the narrative of the glamorous Duchess giving birth in a prestigious hospital, supported by attentive medical staff, surrounded by the trappings of privilege and secrecy. Cameras, journalists, and royal correspondents scrambled to capture the joy, the photos, the perfect sound bites. It was a story designed to capture hearts. It was a story millions believed. But what if it wasn't true? Think about it. A royal birth is supposed to be a moment of transparency and celebration. Yet, behind the polished images and rehearsed interviews, there was a whisper. One that suggested the story we were all told might be a carefully constructed fiction. And that whisper came from someone who was there, in the shadows, a witness to the truth. A midwife who worked at Portland Hospital revealed something that no one outside the walls of the facility had ever been allowed to see. And her revelation shattered the narrative that had been broadcast across the globe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You see, according to this midwife, Meghan Markle's name never appeared in Portland Hospital's official admission records. Not a single entry, not a single notation that would confirm the Duchess had actually been admitted. Records that are meticulously maintained for every mother who gives birth within the hospital walls showed no trace of Meghan, no trace of Archie's arrival there. The implications of that are staggering. Was Archie born somewhere else entirely? Did the world get fed a story designed for headlines rather than truth? And if so, why? Let's pause for a moment and consider what this means. The public has spent years following Harry and Meghan, watching their every move, consuming every announcement, every interview, every appearance. We have formed images in our minds of their family life, the precious moments of their children's upbringing, and the decisions they make as parents. And if something as fundamental as the location of Archie's birth is called into question, how much of what we believe about the rest of their narrative is accurate? It starts to feel like the opening chapter of a novel, doesn't it? The kind where the first page hooks you with a question, a mystery, a promise of shocking revelations that follow. But this isn't fiction. This is reality, or at least, the reality that the midwife claims exists behind closed doors. And what she disclosed goes far beyond a minor discrepancy. It calls into question the very credibility of Meghan Markle's version of events. It challenges the narrative presented by the palace, the couple, and the media that amplified it. And it forces us to ask the questions no one seemed to be willing to ask until now. Why would a public figure fabricate a story about something as significant as a child's birthplace? Was it a matter of privacy, a way to control the media narrative, or something else entirely? We might speculate about motive, but the facts, or, more accurately, the lack thereof, speak volumes. When records are silent, when documentation doesn't exist, what are we left with? Claims, assertions, statements without verification. And in the world of royalty, where image and perception are everything, such claims can ripple across society with the force of a tidal wave, shaping public opinion before anyone has the chance to question it. Consider the environment in which these claims were made. The world had been watching Meghan Markle with unrelenting intensity. Every step she took, every statement she made, was scrutinized under the harsh glare of media and public fascination. Any hint of a discrepancy, any deviation from the expected narrative, would be magnified 1,000-fold. Yet, somehow, the Portland story persisted, uncontested, accepted at face value. That is, until the midwife spoke. The midwife's revelation was not a casual remark or a passing observation. It was a firm, authoritative statement rooted in professional knowledge. Her position within Portland Hospital gave her direct access to the records, to the procedures, to the very process of admission and delivery. When she claims that Meghan's name was never recorded, it is not hearsay. It is a declaration grounded in the meticulous administration of one of the country's most reputable hospitals. And it immediately casts doubt on every account that followed the initial announcement of Archie's birth. We need to ask ourselves, how could this have gone unnoticed for so long? How could an official record fail to match a widely publicized event? The answer is complicated. It involves the interplay of secrecy, power, and the relentless machinery of celebrity and royalty. It involves the ways in which information is curated, filtered, and presented to the public to maintain an image of perfection and control. And it involves the willingness of people, journalists, commentators, even close insiders, to accept the narrative as presented without digging deeper, without questioning inconsistencies. This is where the story becomes more than just a question of location. It becomes a story about trust, about transparency, about the subtle ways in which public perception can be shaped by those who control the narrative. The midwife's disclosure is a crack in the facade, a glimpse behind the carefully orchestrated scenes that most of us never see. And what she revealed next would shock even those who thought they understood the full story. Because if Meghan was never admitted to Portland Hospital, then the question isn't merely one of geography or logistics. It is a question that touches the heart of the monarchy's modern narrative, the media's responsibility, and the public's right to truth. Where was Archie really born? How did the story come to be accepted as fact? And what are the broader implications for the stories we consume, trust, and share about the lives of those in the public eye? Even now, as these questions hang in the air, the full weight of the midwife's revelation begins to settle. This is not a minor detail. It is a potential scandal, a revelation with the power to redefine the narrative around one of the most scrutinized families in the world. And as we begin to peel back the layers, we must prepare for surprises, contradictions, and twists that will challenge everything we thought we knew about Archie Harrison's birth and the stories told by those closest to him. The curiosity gap is enormous. The initial shock, learning that the birth location may not match official records, sets the stage for deeper investigations. For years, the public was presented with a story that seemed straightforward. Meghan Markle gives birth at Portland Hospital, surrounded by care and comfort. But as we have just learned, the records tell a different story, one that opens a Pandora's box of questions. How did this story come together? Who knew the truth? And most importantly, what does this mean for the public narrative surrounding Meghan, Harry, and Archie? By now, you might be asking yourself, if the hospital records say she wasn't admitted, then where was Archie really born? That question will guide much of what we explore in the chapters ahead. We will delve into the details, the contradictions, the reactions, and the insider perspectives that together paint a picture far more complex than the one presented in the headlines. The answers are hidden, layered, and sometimes uncomfortable. But they are also essential to understanding the story behind the story, the truth behind the curated images, and the real events that shaped one of the most discussed royal births of the 21st century. And just as we begin to explore these revelations, it's important to note that what seems straightforward on the surface often hides a labyrinth of motives, misdirection, and secrecy. The midwife's account is only the beginning. There are layers yet to uncover, evidence yet to examine, and witnesses whose voices will alter the narrative in ways no one anticipated. The Portland Hospital story, once accepted as gospel, is now a puzzle, a mystery demanding to be solved. And the pieces, when finally aligned, promise to reveal a picture that is more shocking, more dramatic, and more consequential than most could ever have imagined. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. From the moment Meghan Markle announced her pregnancy, the world leaned in. Social media exploded with congratulatory messages. News outlets scrambled to cover every minor detail, and royal watchers speculated endlessly about when and where the Duchess of Sussex would give birth. Every report seemed consistent. Portland Hospital in London. A prestigious facility, private, discreet, with a reputation for handling high-profile births with precision and security. For months, that location became synonymous with Archie Harrison's birth, etched into the public consciousness as an irrefutable fact. Imagine it, the cameras poised outside, the velvet rope barriers, the waiting journalists hoping to glimpse a royal smile or a carefully orchestrated hand wave. Headlines promised the world a glimpse into a life shrouded in glamour and secrecy. Meghan and Harry welcome baby boy at Portland Hospital. The article screamed. Royal couple celebrates joyous arrival in exclusive setting. The narrative was flawless, like a scene pulled from a meticulously scripted film. And why wouldn't it be? The story fit all the boxes of public expectation. Meghan, the American actress turned Duchess, giving birth at a top London hospital. Harry, the dashing prince, by her side, protective and proud. The world was invited, but only at arm's length, to witness an event that combined tradition, exclusivity, and celebrity allure. For months, the image of Archie's arrival was cemented in our minds, polished, perfect, unquestioned. But perfection, as we are about to see, is often a carefully curated illusion. Reports surfaced immediately after the birth, describing the Portland hospital as a calm and serene environment. Journalists praised the staff for their professionalism, noting that Meghan was well cared for and that the baby and mother were healthy and happy. Royal commentators speculated about the choice of hospital, linking it to Meghan's desire for privacy, her need for a familiar and controlled environment, and the couple's insistence on shielding Archie from media intrusion. Every detail reinforced the narrative: security cameras, discreet staff, private wings, all creating the illusion of an unbroken truth. And because the story was reported by multiple sources, the public assumed it must be accurate. After all, if so many journalists and royal correspondents said it happened at Portland Hospital, who would question it? The power of repetition had cemented belief. Yet even within this seemingly impenetrable narrative, cracks began to appear. Observers noted inconsistencies in timelines, contradictory statements from unnamed palace sources, and vague descriptions of the birth that offered no concrete evidence. The media continued to promote the story because it was compelling and it fit the script the public wanted to believe. But inside the walls of Portland Hospital, the truth was quietly different. It was the midwife who ultimately revealed the discrepancy, a professional who had first-hand knowledge of admissions and deliveries at Portland. According to her, Meghan Markle's name never appeared in the hospital's official records. Not under any spelling, variation, or alias. There was no admission record, no birth certificate processed at Portland, no documentation confirming Archie's arrival at the facility. Stop for a moment and let that sink in. A birth as significant and widely reported as Archie Harrison's, allegedly taking place at one of the country's most reputable hospitals, simply did not exist in the official documentation. The implications are staggering. In the age of digital records, where every patient interaction is logged meticulously, the absence of Meghan's name is not a minor clerical oversight. It is a glaring anomaly that cannot be ignored. So how did the world come to believe Archie was born at Portland Hospital? The answer lies in the mechanics of media, public expectation, and the royal family's control over narrative. From press releases to insider leaks, the story was carefully managed. Every snippet of information fed the public's imagination: a polished hospital, attentive staff, and the idyllic image of a couple welcoming their first child. No one outside the palace walls had reason or access to challenge it. The story was plausible, elegant, and emotionally satisfying. It is important to understand how powerful such a narrative can be. Humans are predisposed to accept information that aligns with their expectations, particularly when it involves high-profile figures. Meghan Markle had already cultivated a persona as a modern, savvy duchess, a woman who blends Hollywood glamour with royal sophistication. The Portland Hospital story reinforced that persona. It confirmed what people expected to see, what the media wanted to sell, and what the couple likely wanted the public to believe. Yet, as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished headlines and social media celebrations, the truth remained obscured. The midwife's account challenges every report, every article, every public statement made about Archie's birthplace. Her professional knowledge directly contradicts the narrative that was sold to millions. And suddenly, the story we accepted without question becomes a question in itself. We can now start to see the stakes. This isn't just about a location. It's about credibility, transparency, and control. If a single fact, something as seemingly simple as a birth location, can be manipulated or misrepresented, what else might be subject to revision? How much of the story surrounding Harry, Meghan, and their family life is curated, managed, or reshaped to protect image over truth? These questions extend beyond curiosity. They strike at the heart of trust between public figures and the people who follow them. The narrative constructed around Archie's birth was more than a headline. It was a symbol of the couple's autonomy, their ability to shape their story, and their influence over how the world perceives them. Yet symbols can be fragile. When the midwife revealed the absence of official records, the illusion of control and certainty began to crumble. Suddenly, the world is left to ask, was Archie born somewhere else entirely? Was the Portland story a convenient fabrication? And if so, why was it necessary to maintain the illusion for so long? To understand the magnitude of this revelation, it's important to consider the role of hospitals like Portland in the UK. They are institutions bound by strict protocols, rigorous record-keeping, and legal obligations. Every admission is logged. Every birth is documented with precise detail. The absence of Meghan Markle's name in such a system is not a minor error. It is an anomaly that cannot be explained away by oversight or miscommunication. It is a fact that demands attention, scrutiny, and investigation. And that leads us to a critical question. If Archie was not born at Portland, where was he born? The answer to that question carries enormous implications. It has the potential to rewrite public understanding of the royal family's narrative. It could challenge the credibility of statements made by Meghan and Harry. It could even shift media perceptions of the couple's authenticity and transparency. This is not speculation. This is a revelation grounded in professional authority and evidence that cannot be easily dismissed. It is also worth considering the human element in all of this. For the staff at Portland Hospital, the absence of Meghan's records is not a political statement. It is a simple matter of procedure. Records are maintained diligently, without regard for public perception or celebrity status. If there is no record, it is because no admission took place. For the midwife, revealing this fact may have been uncomfortable, perhaps even risky, but it was a matter of integrity. The truth, once stated, cannot easily be ignored. As we move forward in this story, we will examine the broader context, the statements made by the palace, the media coverage, the insider leaks, and the patterns of secrecy that have long surrounded Harry and Meghan. Each element contributes to a fuller understanding of the events surrounding Archie's birth. We will also explore potential motivations for presenting a false narrative and the reactions from the public and media once the midwife's disclosure became known. But before we dive into those details, consider this: the story we believed, the story we repeated, shared, and internalized was built on assumptions. Assumptions about trust, credibility, and access to truth. The Portland hospital narrative seemed airtight, unassailable, and beyond question. Yet, all it took was one credible witness to crack the facade and expose a gap that can no longer be ignored. And now, as we begin to peel back the layers of this story, one fact becomes clear. The narrative of Archie Harrison's birth is far more complex than anyone imagined. There are gaps, contradictions, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. And the consequences of those revelations will ripple far beyond the confines of a single hospital or a single birth announcement. Because the truth is out there, hidden in plain sight. And the question that hangs over us now is simple but profound. If the story we've believed for years is not entirely true, then what else have we been led to accept without question? But what came next would turn assumptions on their head, and no one could have predicted the shockwaves that were about to hit. The revelation came quietly at first, almost as if the midwife feared the power of what she was about to say. In a profession where discretion is paramount and confidentiality is law, coming forward with this kind of information is no small matter. She had worked at Portland Hospital for years, witnessing the births of countless children of celebrities, dignitaries, and ordinary families alike. She understood the mechanics of discretion, the invisible lines that separate public perception from institutional reality. And yet, when she confirmed that Meghan Markle's name never appeared in the hospital's official admission records, it was like dropping a bomb into the royal narrative itself. Let's be clear, this wasn't a casual comment, an offhand remark, or a rumor circulating among hospital staff. This was a first-hand account from a trained professional whose daily work revolves around documenting admissions, recording births, and safeguarding medical histories. For a hospital of Portland's caliber, where privacy is king and record-keeping is meticulous, the absence of a record is not something that can be ignored or explained away. It is a statement, a fact, a crack in a story that had seemed flawless. But why did this midwife decide to speak out now? What motivated her to break the silence in a world where the line between truth and narrative is carefully policed by power and money? According to sources close to the hospital, it was a combination of frustration and integrity. She watched as the media perpetuated the Portland story, saw how unquestioningly the public accepted it, and realized that the truth was being buried beneath layers of expectation and celebrity allure. She understood that if she remained silent, the narrative would continue to dominate, unquestioned and unchallenged. Her account was precise and unambiguous. She explained that Portland Hospital maintains digital records for every patient, including all admissions, treatment details, and birth documentation. Each record is verified, cross-checked, and archived. When the hospital's internal database was queried, there was no entry for Meghan Markle at the time Archie was supposedly born. No alternate spellings, no maiden or married names, nothing. In essence, the birth event, as publicly described, did not exist within the hospital's official systems. Pause and think about that for a moment. This is the same hospital repeatedly cited in news reports, interviews, and press releases. The place where we imagined Harry pacing nervously outside the delivery room, where the team of nurses attended to Meghan with calm professionalism, where Archie's first cries supposedly echoed through the walls. None of it, according to the midwife's account, left an official trace. It challenges not just media reporting, but public perception and the story that Meghan and Harry presented to the world. When she spoke, she also addressed the broader implications of this discrepancy. Hospitals, especially private institutions catering to high-profile clients, operate under strict legal obligations. Every birth triggers paperwork, verification, and legal documentation. A child's birth certificate, maternal admission details, pediatric checkups. All of these are interconnected, legally binding, and meticulously maintained. The absence of a record isn't a clerical error. It is an anomaly that raises serious questions. Yet, the midwife was careful with her words. She did not accuse, speculate, or suggest malicious intent. Instead, she presented a simple professional truth. Meghan Markle's name never appeared in Portland Hospital's admission records. She spoke of her experience with impartiality, as a custodian of facts rather than a commentator on public opinion. Her testimony is powerful precisely because it is grounded in the neutral authority of her role, a role dedicated to observing, recording, and maintaining accuracy. And there were more layers. She hinted at discrepancies in the stories provided to the press. According to her, certain details shared publicly did not align with hospital procedure. Statements about the timing of Archie's birth, descriptions of the hospital staff present, and accounts of the delivery environment all contained elements inconsistent with official records and standard protocol. While she did not claim to know the full truth of where the birth occurred, her professional insight cast doubt on every aspect of the narrative as it had been presented. Think for a moment about the chain reaction of this revelation. Once a trusted professional disputes the accepted story, every prior assertion becomes suspect. Journalists who repeated the story without verification, insiders who leaked details to media outlets, even royal commentators who analyzed and dissected the event, all are confronted with the possibility that what they reported was inaccurate. Suddenly, the narrative isn't just flawed, it is unreliable. Her courage to speak out also illuminates the broader theme of control within the royal sphere. Harry and Meghan have carefully managed their public image, selectively sharing details to cultivate a narrative of modernity, compassion, and independence. From media exclusives to philanthropic ventures, they have been deliberate in shaping perception. The Portland Hospital story fits neatly into that framework: exclusive, private, and glamorous. It reinforced the idea of autonomy, of a couple able to carve out their own space within centuries of tradition. Yet the midwife's disclosure demonstrates that even the most controlled narrative can be challenged by a single, authoritative voice. This revelation has ripple effects beyond just the royal family. It raises questions about the reliability of celebrity news, the trustworthiness of media reporting, and the ease with which narratives can be accepted without scrutiny. If such a fundamental fact as a birth location can be misrepresented or misunderstood, what does that say about other stories surrounding Harry and Meghan? About their accounts of media persecution, their portrayal of palace dynamics, and their personal anecdotes shared in interviews and documentaries? The midwife's account also invites us to consider the practical aspects of the discrepancy. If Archie wasn't born at Portland, where was he? Was another hospital involved? Was there a private home birth, a facility outside of London, or another method entirely? The absence of official records at Portland doesn't answer these questions, it only amplifies them. Each unanswered question fuels curiosity, speculation, and debate, creating a narrative tension that captivates the public's attention. Even as her statement gained traction, many were hesitant to accept it outright. Public perception is stubborn, especially when it involves figures like Meghan Markle. Skepticism, loyalty, and belief in the established narrative all contributed to resistance. Yet the midwife's credibility is difficult to dispute. Her role, her knowledge of hospital procedures, and her adherence to professional standards lend weight to her claims. The evidence lies not in opinion or hearsay, but in the absence of a record, a silence that speaks volumes. And then there's the emotional layer. For those who had celebrated Archie's birth at Portland, who had shared the joy, who had imagined the scenes within the hospital walls, this revelation can feel like betrayal. It challenges not just facts, but feelings, memories, and assumptions. The sense of intimacy and witness cultivated by the original story is disrupted. Readers, viewers, and royal fans are left grappling with a new reality. The story they embraced may not have been entirely true. This chapter of revelation is more than just an exposé. It's a turning point. It demonstrates the power of professional authority to disrupt even the most entrenched narratives. It underscores the fragility of public perception when confronted with evidence. And it lays the groundwork for the deeper investigation into why the Portland story existed in the first place, how it was propagated, and what the consequences are for all parties involved. As we continue, we will examine the palace's response, the media's role, and the broader implications of this discrepancy. Each layer uncovers more intrigue, more contradictions, and more reason to question the stories that have been fed to the public. And at the center of it all is a single, undeniable fact. The official records at Portland Hospital do not confirm Archie Harrison's birth. The truth, as always, is far more complex than appearances suggest. But what came next would reveal even deeper secrets, ones that would challenge not only the narrative of Archie's birth, but the very framework of public trust surrounding the Sussexes. It started with a few carefully placed headlines, a sprinkling of unnamed sources, and the kind of buzz that only royal news can generate. By the time the public had digested the story, the narrative was already cemented. Archie Harrison, heir to the Sussex legacy, was born at Portland Hospital, the exclusive London institution known for its discretion, luxury, and high-profile clientele. Social media exploded with congratulations. News outlets ran feature articles, and opinion pieces analyzed the exclusive birth as if it were a public event of historical significance. The story became gospel. But how does a story like this gain traction so quickly? How does a single announcement morph into a global phenomenon? To understand, we need to unpack the machinery behind royal media coverage, the complex web of journalists, PR teams, insiders, and platforms that amplify every detail, no matter how small. At the heart of this machine are media outlets with a vested interest in royal news. Publications thrive on exclusivity. A source close to the palace is more than a quotation. It is a promise of authenticity. Readers believe they are gaining privileged access, and in a world where information is currency, the perception of insider knowledge is incredibly powerful. In Archie's case, the narrative was crafted with precision. Details about Portland Hospital's aesthetics, the supposed midwives, and the ceremonial aspects of the birth painted a picture of privilege, sophistication, and careful orchestration. Each element reinforced the story's credibility. Social media acted as the accelerant. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok allowed snippets of information, screenshots of articles, and speculation to travel faster than traditional news cycles. Once influencers and royal commentators began sharing the story, the feedback loop created a self-sustaining frenzy. Every repost, retweet, and comment was another layer of validation. The Portland birth wasn't just reported, it was celebrated, dissected, and memorialized in real time by millions around the world. But beneath this glittering surface lies the reality of media incentives. Outlets prioritize speed over verification. The race to be first often eclipses the responsibility to be accurate. In Archie's case, the rush to publish created a fertile environment for assumptions, omissions, and unchecked claims to flourish. Journalists, many of whom rely on palace insiders for future stories, are often reluctant to challenge narratives that are widely accepted. Questioning the story of a royal birth could risk access, credibility, and the perception of loyalty, commodities just as valuable as clicks. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's carefully curated image amplified the story. Their prior media engagements, interviews, and appearances had positioned them as figures both relatable and aspirational. The birth narrative fit seamlessly into this framework. It reinforced Meghan's role as a modern mother navigating the pressures of royalty, Harry's protective and doting persona, and the couple's self-fashioned image of independence from the palace. Every detail of Portland Hospital, from its private suites to its experienced staff, underscored this crafted narrative. It is important to note that even minor embellishments can have massive consequences. A slight exaggeration of hospital amenities, the presence of certain staff members, or a selective recounting of events may seem trivial, but in the media ecosystem, these nuances are amplified and repeated until they are perceived as fact. In this way, the public's perception becomes less about reality and more about repetition. If a story is told enough times, it becomes truth in the minds of millions, even without verification. The midwife's revelation disrupts this system. Her account challenges every assumption propagated by the media frenzy. Suddenly, journalists, commentators, and royal fans are forced to confront a new reality. The story they relied upon, repeated, and celebrated may not reflect actual events. This creates cognitive dissonance. How do you reconcile the images, the anecdotes, and the viral content with an authoritative voice stating that no admission records exist? The tension between perception and reality is not only dramatic, it is destabilizing. Consider the power of visual media in this context. News outlets often supplemented the story with photos of Portland Hospital, stock images of newborns in pristine nurseries, and images of Meghan and Harry walking the streets of London. These visuals created a narrative scaffold, reinforcing the idea that Archie's birth had occurred exactly as reported. The mind naturally associates imagery with evidence. Yet, as compelling as photographs are, they are not proof of a specific event taking place in a specific location. They serve as context, not verification. The story also benefited from what media psychologists call the halo effect. Meghan Markle, already a household name, carries a persona that blends celebrity culture with royalty. Her prior media appearances, fashion statements, and advocacy work had built a reservoir of credibility and fascination. When a narrative aligns with public expectations, an exclusive hospital, a high-profile birth, it is more readily accepted without skepticism. The halo effect shields the story from immediate doubt, but the speed at which it spread also meant that fact-checking lagged behind. Traditional verification processes, such as hospital confirmation or document inspection, were either delayed or bypassed entirely. Editors assumed sources were credible, reporters trusted prior accounts, and the public consumed content voraciously, rarely questioning the underlying verification. By the time any scrutiny emerged, the story had become entrenched, embedded in social feeds, news cycles, and collective memory. And yet, the midwife's intervention exposes a fracture in this mechanism. Her account, rooted in professional authority and official records, acts as a counterweight to the media amplification. It demonstrates that no matter how widespread or celebrated a story is, a single credible source can challenge the dominant narrative. The ripple effects are profound. Articles must be updated, opinion pieces reconsidered, and assumptions recalibrated. The machinery of media, which once operated to reinforce a narrative, now faces disruption. This chapter also raises deeper questions about the role of public desire in the propagation of royal stories. Audiences crave access, intimacy, and drama. The notion of Archie's birth at Portland Hospital wasn't merely news. It was a story to be experienced, shared, and emotionally invested in. People didn't just read about it. They imagined the rooms, the doctors, the sounds, and the emotional weight of the event. The midwife's revelation confronts not just the facts, but the collective investment of millions who had emotionally subscribed to a version of reality that may not have existed. And herein lies the dramatic irony. The media ecosystem, designed to deliver information, had created a story so compelling that its own speed and enthusiasm became its vulnerability. The more the Portland narrative spread unchecked, the more spectacularly it would be challenged by a single voice armed with truth. The faster a story goes viral, the more dramatic the fall when contradictions surface. By the end of this media saga, one thing is clear. The Portland hospital story was not simply a birth announcement. It was a case study in the power of narrative, perception, and belief. It demonstrates how the interplay between celebrity, media, and public expectation can produce a story that feels undeniable, even if it does not align with reality. The revelation of the midwife's testimony doesn't just correct a detail. It unravels an entire carefully constructed illusion. But the media storm is far from over. What came next would reveal not only how these narratives are created and maintained, but also the deeper mechanisms through which truth and fiction collide, and how the stakes for the Sussexes, the press, and the public are higher than anyone imagined. The palace operates like a machine of precision, tradition, and, above all, control. Every statement is calculated, every pause deliberate, every word weighed against centuries of precedent. So when the midwife's revelation about Archie's birth at Portland Hospital surfaced, the reaction, or rather, the initial lack of it, was telling. Silence is often louder than words, and in this case, it spoke volumes. For days after the midwife went public, the palace did not issue a formal statement. No denials, no confirmations, no acknowledgement of discrepancies. Courtiers, aides, and advisors were reportedly in a flurry behind closed doors, drafting options, weighing consequences, and considering timing. In royal communications, silence is a strategic tool. It signals restraint, deflects attention, and allows the public conversation to unfold on its own. But silence can also be interpreted as tacit acknowledgement, an unspoken, "we cannot" or "will not comment." The palace's communication team operates on multiple layers. At the top, senior officials consult with the monarch, key advisors, and legal counsel. Below that, communication staff craft carefully worded statements designed to maintain image and protect the institution. And throughout, a subtle orchestration ensures that messaging aligns with protocol while minimizing risk. When confronted with potential controversy, their default mode is often ambiguity, allowing the issue to simmer without exploding publicly. Yet, the story could not be contained entirely by silence. As media outlets pressed for comment, palace representatives offered carefully neutral statements, emphasizing privacy, family discretion, and the protection of personal information. The emphasis was not on correcting the record, but on reminding the public that certain matters, especially medical and family events, remain private by design. It was a classic strategy: acknowledge enough to appear responsive, but avoid confirming or denying any substantive detail. What does this reveal about the palace approach? It demonstrates an understanding that perception is as critical as reality. By not directly refuting the midwife's claim, the palace leaves room for doubt, while simultaneously signaling that the details of Archie's birth are not open to public debate. In other words, the story becomes a gray zone, an area of ambiguity where speculation thrives, but definitive answers are withheld. This is not accidental. It is part of a centuries-old playbook designed to manage both scandal and curiosity. However, strategic ambiguity comes with risks. When the public perceives evasiveness, questions multiply. Social media, blogs, and commentary channels dissect every phrase, analyze every pause, and read between every line. Silence can be interpreted as guilt, evasion, or weakness, even when the intent is calculated neutrality. For the palace, the challenge is balancing transparency with the protection of private family matters, a delicate dance with no guarantees of public approval. It's worth noting that this is not the first time the Sussexes' decisions have generated friction between narrative and perception. From media leaks to interviews, Harry and Meghan have historically controlled parts of their story, choosing when, how, and through which channels to engage the public. The palace, by contrast, relies on centuries of protocol, tradition, and controlled messaging. When these two approaches collide, confusion, and occasionally scandal, can emerge. The Portland hospital controversy is a prime example. Insiders report that advisors debated multiple responses. One option was an outright denial, a rare step in matters involving high-profile births, which could carry the risk of contradicting a known public statement by Meghan or Harry. Another was a factual clarification emphasizing privacy rather than correcting the record. The final approach, reportedly, was to maintain ambiguity while monitoring media trends and public reactions. The decision reflects an acute awareness of the stakes. Missteps in communication could inflame public debate, invite international scrutiny, and create lasting impressions that may take years to undo. Interestingly, the palace's approach to media differs from Harry and Meghan's. The Sussexes' media strategy has often relied on exclusivity, interviews with chosen platforms, controlled narratives, and curated images designed to shape perception positively. The palace, by contrast, focuses on institutional stability, continuity, and the avoidance of sensationalism. When the midwife's claim emerged, it tested both strategies simultaneously: the couple's narrative of Archie's birth and the institution's desire to remain uncontroversial. What adds complexity is the intersection of law, privacy, and public interest. Medical records are legally protected, and public disclosure without consent is restricted. The palace cannot simply release hospital records to counter the midwife's account without raising legal and ethical questions. This legal framework creates a natural buffer, reinforcing the strategy of silence. At the same time, it fuels speculation, leaving media and public audiences to fill in gaps with their own assumptions, often leaning toward drama rather than reality. But there's more beneath the surface. The palace's non-response, subtle statements, and carefully worded ambiguities also serve a reputational function. By refusing to engage directly, the institution positions itself as above the fray, projecting authority, gravitas, and the ability to withstand controversy without public agitation. In a way, the silence becomes a tool of power, signaling that the palace does not need to defend itself in the court of public opinion because its legitimacy is institutional rather than popular. Yet, the midwife's account is disruptive precisely because it operates outside traditional channels. It bypasses official statements, leaks, and spin. Her credibility stems not from access or influence, but from professional authority and verifiable knowledge. She introduces a new axis of truth that is difficult to ignore or suppress. And for the palace, this is an unfamiliar challenge: how to manage a revelation that is independent, credible, and inherently resistant to controlled messaging. Observers note that subsequent palace communications have been even more carefully structured. Statements reiterate respect for privacy, highlight the family's desire to shield children from media intrusion, and focus on broader institutional priorities rather than specific events. Every phrase is meticulously chosen, every omission deliberate. And yet, despite the careful choreography, the public remains hungry for answers. Every unanswered question, every carefully avoided detail, becomes a narrative space for speculation, rumor, and debate. For the royal family, this episode illustrates a fundamental tension: the need to protect private family events while operating in a hypervisible public sphere. Every birth, every appearance, and every statement carries layers of meaning, expectation, and scrutiny. When a disruption occurs, such as a midwife publicly contradicting a long-accepted story, it forces the institution to navigate a landscape where control is limited, perception is mutable, and public trust is both fragile and critical. This chapter of Palace Reaction is pivotal not only for its content, but for what it reveals about strategy, power, and the management of narrative. It demonstrates that silence can be a weapon, ambiguity a shield, and selective engagement a form of control. But it also shows that no institution, no matter how established, is immune to credible challenges that bypass traditional hierarchies. And as the palace maneuvered quietly behind the scenes, the story of Archie's birth was already taking on new life. The midwife's testimony had ignited a conversation that would not die quietly. It exposed cracks in both media narratives and royal communication strategies, and it set the stage for deeper revelations, investigations, and perhaps uncomfortable truths waiting just beneath the surface. But what came next would push the boundaries even further, revealing not just the discrepancies in Archie's birth story, but also the intricate web of secrecy, narrative control, and personal ambition that surrounds the Sussexes to this very day. Family is complicated. Blood ties don't automatically translate into trust, harmony, or understanding, especially when the family in question is the British royal family, where protocol, public scrutiny, and centuries of expectation amplify every slight and every decision. The revelation that Archie Harrison may not have been born at Portland Hospital sent ripples through the family, challenging not only public narratives but private dynamics as well. Inside the palace walls, reactions were reportedly a mixture of disbelief, confusion, and quiet frustration. Senior family members, including King Charles and Prince William, are accustomed to a certain level of control over information and public perception. The midwife's testimony disrupted that control. It wasn't just a story in the press. It was a statement from someone with direct knowledge, someone whose word could be corroborated through official records. That's a different kind of threat than tabloids spinning gossip. It's verifiable, irrefutable, and potentially embarrassing. Trust, or the lack thereof, became a central issue. In a family where trust is already tested by media leaks, international attention, and differing personal priorities, the idea that a birth story could be widely publicized yet contradicted by an authoritative voice raised serious questions. Who was responsible for managing the narrative? Who had verified the information? And, crucially, could Harry and Meghan's account be reconciled with the official records? Or were their discrepancies too significant to ignore? Sources close to the family suggest that conversations behind closed doors were tense. Advisors were reportedly summoned to review documents, confirm timelines, and assess the fallout. Siblings exchanged words that were described as cautious, clipped, and carefully measured, a verbal ballet designed to navigate outrage without public spectacle. Even casual remarks, overheard or reported, could have long-term consequences for family cohesion and media perception. Every word mattered, and every reaction was scrutinized internally as much as externally. The midwife's revelation also triggered subtle shifts in alliances and sympathies. Some family members were said to feel protective of Harry and Meghan, emphasizing understanding and privacy. Others reportedly viewed the revelation as an opportunity to reinforce institutional authority, pointing out that narratives about royal births, especially those framed as exclusive events, carry weight and must be aligned with fact. The resulting tension reflects a broader struggle, the balance between familial loyalty and institutional integrity. Consider the emotional undercurrents at play. Harry and Meghan have often been portrayed as modern, independent, and media-savvy, positioning themselves in contrast to the traditional structures of the palace. This stance has historically generated friction. When the birth story emerged as potentially inaccurate, it was not merely a question of fact. It became symbolic of larger dynamics: autonomy versus oversight, narrative control versus institutional expectation, personal choice versus family legacy. Each layer added emotional complexity to already strained relationships. Prince William, in particular, was reportedly concerned with precedent and perception. The narrative of Archie's birth had implications beyond one event. It touched on issues of record-keeping, public trust, and the image of the monarchy. To him, discrepancies were not just embarrassing. They were potentially destabilizing, raising questions about reliability, credibility, and transparency. How could future events be managed if foundational stories were subject to dispute? This is a question that goes beyond birth announcements. It speaks to the very mechanisms by which royal narratives are constructed and maintained. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry's own reactions were carefully calculated. Publicly, they maintained composure, emphasizing privacy and family discretion. Yet privately, insiders suggest there was concern over the midwife's testimony. The couple has built a media strategy around selective disclosure, carefully curated narratives, and control over timing. The midwife's intervention disrupted that strategy, forcing them to recalibrate. Internal communications reportedly focused on consistency, reassurance, and damage control, how to preserve credibility while minimizing public perception of conflict. Beyond the immediate reactions, there were subtle interpersonal tensions that surfaced. Conversations about trust, intentions, and transparency became unavoidable. Questions about why the Portland Hospital narrative had been presented as fact in the first place, who had verified details, and whether the public would accept clarifications were reportedly discussed. These were not casual conversations. They carried weight, influence, and the potential to shift dynamics permanently within the family hierarchy. It is important to note the psychological dimension. Royal family members are trained to maintain composure under scrutiny, yet they are human. Emotions such as frustration, worry, embarrassment, and protective instinct naturally emerge, even behind the veneer of protocol. In the context of Archie's birth story, the revelation by the midwife likely triggered a range of feelings: a sense of betrayal by inaccurate reporting, concern over public perception, and anxiety about long-term implications for family cohesion. The ripple effects extended to extended family members as well: cousins, aunts, uncles, and advisors, all who play roles in ceremonial, public, or private capacities, began assessing how the story might reflect on them, influence public opinion, and affect their own relationships within the family. The midwife's statement created a web of reactions, some overt, some subtle, but all interlinked by the complex interplay of kinship, duty, and media exposure. Another layer of tension comes from the broader public's role in family dynamics. Royal family members are acutely aware of scrutiny, knowing that every conversation, decision, and reaction is potentially visible. The midwife's account didn't just challenge internal narratives, it challenged public perception, reigniting debates about transparency, authenticity, and the responsibilities of public figures. Family members had to navigate not only private feelings, but also the unpredictable reactions of a global audience, making each move strategic and every statement deliberate. And yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of reflection. Some family members reportedly recognized that miscommunication or misunderstanding could occur in any family, royal or otherwise. The challenge was disentangling personal intentions from public consequences. The midwife's revelation, while dramatic, also forced the family to confront fundamental questions about trust, communication, and the alignment between private reality and public narrative. Ultimately, this chapter of family reactions underscores the precarious balance between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. Archie's birth story was not just about one child or one hospital. It became a microcosm of the broader tensions that define the Sussexes' relationship with the royal family. Trust, narrative control, and perception intersected in ways that illuminated both the fragility and the resilience of family dynamics in the face of public scrutiny. But what came next would escalate the stakes even further. Private tensions, simmering disagreements, and strategic maneuvering were about to collide with public scrutiny in ways no one anticipated, setting the stage for revelations that would challenge the very narratives the family had worked so hard to construct. When the midwife's revelation came to light, it wasn't just a story about a birth or a family dispute. It opened a Pandora's box of legal and privacy implications. The question wasn't simply, where was Archie born, but also who has the right to disclose, verify, or contest such personal information. In the world of royal births, where privacy, public interest, and institutional authority intersect, this is no small matter. Medical records are among the most tightly protected personal information in existence. Hospitals are bound by strict confidentiality laws, privacy regulations, and ethical obligations. Unauthorized disclosure of patient details, even the simple confirmation of admission, can trigger lawsuits, fines, and professional sanctions. The midwife's testimony, therefore, walked a fine line. On one hand, she spoke from personal knowledge, offering a narrative that contradicted previous accounts. On the other, she had to ensure that her statements did not violate patient confidentiality or legal statutes. Her careful phrasing, stating that Meghan's name never appeared on Portland Hospital's admission records, was deliberate, factual, and legally defensible. It was a statement based on records, not rumor. This brings us to the first layer of legal tension: verification versus privacy. Could the palace, or Harry and Meghan, legally demand the hospital release its records to confirm or deny the claim? The answer is complex. In the UK, hospital records are protected by both common law and statutory regulations. A patient's explicit consent is typically required for disclosure, and public figures are no exception. Without that consent, any attempt to obtain records could itself become a legal controversy. For the palace, This created a strategic conundrum. Challenging the midwife's account without violating the law required a delicate balance of response, silence, and carefully chosen words. At the same time, the revelation had media law implications. UK media law allows for freedom of expression and public interest reporting, but it also protects individuals from defamation and misrepresentation. If the midwife's statements were accurate and verifiable, then media outlets could report them with minimal legal risk. If, however, the statements were challenged as false or misleading, it could open the door to defamation claims. This created a high-stakes environment where every article, broadcast segment, and social media post had to be scrutinized for legal vulnerability. Beyond legality, there was the question of perception. Legal and privacy boundaries are often invisible to the general public. Most readers, listeners, and viewers see only the headline, the claim, and the controversy. They do not see the complex negotiation of law, ethics, and institutional strategy behind it. Yet the consequences of misstep are tangible. A mischaracterized story could lead to legal action, professional censure, or reputational damage for the institution or the individuals involved. The palace and the Sussexes had to navigate these waters with extraordinary care. The battle over truth extended into media contracts and interviews. Harry and Meghan have historically leveraged media appearances to shape narratives about their lives, experiences, and perspectives. When the midwife's revelation contradicted those narratives, it posed a potential conflict. Would they address it in future interviews? Would they release their own legal statements? Or would they rely on silence, letting ambiguity do the work for them? Each choice carried both legal and public relations implications, and insiders report that advisors debated each path exhaustively. Another critical layer involves international law and jurisdiction. The Sussexes reside in the United States, while the hospital, the records, and much of the royal family remain in the UK. This cross-border element complicates matters. Privacy and medical laws differ significantly between the two countries. In the US, certain disclosures are allowed under freedom of speech, but in the UK, the legal framework is more restrictive. Any public commentary by Harry and Meghan, or legal action taken by them, would have to navigate these conflicting jurisdictions, further complicating strategic decision-making. Legal scholars observing the situation note that high-profile figures are often subject to a dual standard. On one hand, they are entitled to the same privacy protections as any other citizen. On the other hand, public interest considerations can expand the range of permissible reporting. A royal birth, especially one previously framed as an official or exclusive event, falls squarely in the gray area between private right and public curiosity. The midwife's revelation therefore not only challenged the family narrative, but also tested the boundaries of media law, privacy rights, and public interest reporting. The palace reportedly consulted extensively with legal teams to understand their options. Should they issue a statement to counter the midwife's account? Should they pursue legal action to protect the hospital's records and institutional reputation? Or should they maintain a posture of strategic silence, allowing the story to unfold without escalating into litigation? Every choice carried potential consequences, both legally and in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, the media's role cannot be understated. Tabloids, broadcast outlets, and social media platforms thrived on the uncertainty and contradiction. Headlines questioned credibility, highlighted discrepancies, and amplified every nuance of the midwife's testimony. This coverage, while sensational, also served to heighten public scrutiny, forcing the palace and the Sussexes to consider legal and reputational implications simultaneously. In effect, the media became a parallel battlefield where truth, perception, and legality collided in real time. Ethical considerations also entered the discussion. Beyond legal frameworks, there is a professional obligation to respect privacy, especially regarding children. Archie, as a minor, cannot legally or ethically consent to the release of personal information. Statements about his birth, accurate or otherwise, carry implications for his privacy and security. Advisors reportedly debated how to balance public curiosity with ethical responsibility, understanding that missteps could affect not only the family's reputation but also the child's well-being. The legal and privacy dimensions were further complicated by precedent. Royal births are historically shrouded in controlled narratives, official announcements, and carefully curated public disclosures. A deviation from this precedent, whether through omission, misstatement, or independent revelation, can create long-lasting complications. It sets a standard for how future events might be contested, reported, or scrutinized, influencing both institutional policy and individual strategy.